All right, Danielle, episode 22,
22.
which is master number 22, or when you put it together, four. It's my number. It is the builder of the organization. And then 22 is the master builder. So when you think about the number and then collapsing it down to the builder, what we'll talk about in this episode is the architect of order, scaling smart, taking a leap from contributor to creator, building infrastructure. That's what fours do, showing up consistently, doing the unseen work, but making sure you're compensated appropriately for that. And then fours are often, I'm sure you'll be surprised by this, but fours are often underappreciated, but the backbone of everything thriving in the business.
Didn't I come out to be a 4 before?
Are you two? I thought you were two when we
Am
did
I 2?
yours.
4.
I think you're a two. I
Okay, maybe a 2. Okay.
think you were a two. Yeah.
Couldn't remember.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about why systems people are often overlooked. And I was thinking about our episode as well, and during our little bit of time off and taking a bit of a hiatus and a break for a few weeks, and what we're doing on the Worksties and what we want to accomplish and what we're really about. Thinking about kind of different content that we bring. One,
Mhm,
to me, what was first and foremost true to me is sharing our experience about the journey we've been on.
mhm,
I think we've worked in some pretty great organizations. We worked in some pretty tough organizations or had to overcome so many obstacles. Sometimes when we feel like it, we'll talk about technology and the different resources that are out there. We'll talk about job boards, LinkedIn, social. I mean, I feel like when I was looking back and I was looking at how other podcasters are doing some things and really staying, I don't know if I'll call it tried and true to one subject. I feel like it gets so stale. And being able to just really pivot and talk about whatever's on our mind, that's what I appreciate about us at the Workspace.
yeah, I agree.
My reflection time overall.
I agree, and I've had some people say, "Well, why don't you bring more guests on or do," and I'm like, "That is the intention." That's easier said than done because we're working with our own schedules and other people's schedules and things, and since this isn't all we do, we have to accommodate for that, and also I think, like, with guests and things, it has to make sense,
Hmm.
with whatever we're trying to cover, what makes sense in terms of it. I don't think either one of us want a guest to be like a commercial,
Yeah.
where I think that would be the case. We wanna have something kind of specific to cover that we can't that will enhance what we do or that will be different from what we would normally cover.
Yeah, I agree. I saw a new podcast pop out, and it was called, I think it's a C-suite. Someone that I know runs that. I thought was kind of cool, but there's a lot of guests on there and having voice and things of that nature. But really, what the Worksties is about is saying the things that necessarily aren't said in corporate, having
Okay.
the conversations, living and learning the lessons that we've learned across. So I think this episode to me is near and dear, putting in, I think throughout my career, and you've been along for a lot of that, a lot of the ride, a lot of the journey has about building the foundations, pivoting, implementing change, changing the culture overall, and just really creating an organization or that part of the organization that really becomes one, that becomes a team, that you can get
Mhm.
so much more done than building through separation, is what I'll call it. I think I've seen in some organizations where, there's this separation of what people want to do. So whether they're in a matrix environment, they're in a direct reporting environment, whatever that looks like, they want to create some sort of separation of leadership, separation of whatever it might be across. And it only gets you so far when you do that. To be able to have experts sneeze and work together and not in a silo and bringing that together. You might have different jobs, different functions, different things that you're doing from an organizational standpoint, but being able to somehow find a thread. Like lately, I've been thinking about threading. How do you really pull through
Mhm.
a thread in an organization? How do you make sure that one, it doesn't pull out, right? So when you think that sounded bad, you know what I mean? But when
Yeah.
you're thinking about the
Doesn't
thread, right?
unravel kind
Yeah,
of.
and
Yeah.
you're threading through, like, sometimes you miss a loop, and if you miss that loop, the whole thing might fall apart and looking
Right.
across it, but how do you really build that foundation to thread through of an organization? And as you build up, right, you're actually building that organization from a, bottom up kind of mindset, and
Right.
top down is how culture and things like that should feed through the organization. But I will still argue that the layers, the more people you have at that layer, that is where the culture is actually created. It's not essentially
Yeah.
created at the top. How you operate is looked at and seen, but
Right.
I don't believe it's created there.
No, I agree with that. I agree with that because that's where the people are. So if you only have one person at the top, how are they going to dictate what the entire culture is? It's not. They may perceive that they do or hope that they do, but they're not, it.
Yeah. I would completely agree. You can influence the culture, right? You put in something at the top and you push something down that doesn't feel good to everyone. Now you're influencing the culture and kind of the impacts of that. And then how does I'll call it the foundation, because when you think about the foundation of an organization, that's the people who are doing the majority of the work, the majority of the time. Not that leaders don't work. They just have a different role within it, but keeping those day-to-day operations going, the culture within that becomes so imperative. That's where you get your performance metric. That's where you make it or break it, is the people
Right.
doing the job every single day. You can only do so much leadership and
Right.
having conversations or influence the culture by having it open. So I've done that, right? Sitting in the seat, influencing the culture, saying this is how we're going to operate as a team. But then I have to go down to the team, right? And sit with them to really understand and then to really shape out what they're seeing and then shift the culture from a foundational perspective. So I think that becomes so important when you're looking to build, making it make sense, systems, vision, all of those type of things. And then when you think about we read an article, and it's when we were at Clover. Someone sent it to me. Actually, my boss has sent it to me. Sent it to me,
Oh,
and it was talking about how the empaths or the builders in the organization, they get burnt out because those are the people that everyone comes to, one, to solve the problems, two, what are you going to change, what are you going to do, and three, they feel the pain or the impact of an organization and what people are going through. So if it's a good, healthy culture, you have a little bit more lifespan in those people. And then if it's not as healthy of a culture, then you have a shorter lifespan of those people. They tend to get
right.
burnt out pretty quickly. And I thought
Yeah.
that was interesting when I think about change and career and how you look to evolve. That all comes into play. Definitely comes into play.
Yeah.
So overall, I don't know what you think about that, but
No, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, I think I can think of so many times where there's such a disconnect between what leadership is thinking is happening and what's actually happening. And are they willing to listen to that? Are they willing to make the changes that are, yeah, interesting.
yeah. The trust element too. If I think about trust in leading and how that looks like, it's so easy to break trust and it's so hard to build trust in an organization. So thinking about, again, it goes down to foundation building. What are you looking to create just overall? That's a big piece of it, is to say, how do you earn the trust? Trust is very rarely given. I do give trust. Do you give trust? Are you a trust earner or a trust giver?
I think it depends on the situation. I try to give trust, but I guess it really just depends on the situation. I'm not inherently distrustful, but I think I'm a little bit more cautious than I was at one time. You know what I mean? So I guess it
Yeah.
really just depends.
Yeah, I agree. I give trust first. I may be skeptical about that trust, to your point. Like, I might be like, I don't know if I should really trust in this, but nothing has
Hmm.
shown me otherwise. So I'm going to give that
Sure.
trust first. And I think I do this in personal relationships too. And that, honestly, when I think about, my legacy of relationships, prior to my husband now. But I give the trust first. And then when my trust is broken, I take away my trust and I change. I put up my walls. I do all those things. So this is personal and professional. It's kind of innate in me to just do this. And for me, like, the one thing that I was always looking for is, when I give the trust, who
Hmm.
doesn't break that trust? And it's not a crazy expectation or anything, but it's just like something as simple
No.
as, like, catch a side chat with somebody or whatever else, right? That kind of breaks trust or things of that nature. When I think about that, I give the trust first and then I pull back the trust. There's people that operate opposite. You have to earn the trust. So how do you
Hmm.
build to that? And there's people who automatically give trust and say, I'm going to wait for this to work. I'm going to see as it goes through. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about it, but
Right.
I'm going to go ahead and see how this moves forward. And when you think about building your different, types of people that you're building around and building with and all of those kind of things, trust is one of the most important things.
It's the easiest to destroy.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. To me, it's where kind of the rubber meets the road. And especially if I'm looking for, or not looking for, but if I have a new organization that I'm going to, or, do I trust this organization as an entire organization based on what I've seen out there? Or do I have some going in and then need to feel it out a little bit? I don't think I've gone anywhere where I haven't necessarily trusted first in my career. Have you? Have you been anywhere where you're like, I'm not sure. I really don't trust this place, but I'm going to give it a shot. And has it worked or has it not worked?
Can't think of any. Not No, not really. I mean, I've been in situations where it became clear very quickly that there was a problem or that I shouldn't trust them. Whether it was the company or the leadership or the person I worked with or whatever. But I think I'm the type of person who, if I'm getting a new job, a new role within a company, whatever, you're kind of in that momentum of like change is happening. And so I tend to be pretty open about that and not guarded necessarily.
Hmm.
So I don't think I would inherently distrust out of the gate either.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
That makes
know.
sense. What about when you're faced with change, right? Someone's changing something or it's going to look a little bit different. What's your thought? The organization is building to X. You know what the vision is, you know where they're trying to get to. What makes you innately trust in a change? And then what makes you feel like maybe I don't believe this is the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, companies just like anything are going to change. It's just a matter of how and when. So it's always sort of been my philosophy, if you will, just to roll with it. Like, okay, well, this is what we're doing, and embrace it. Ask questions. I hate it when it appears that companies are changing just for change's sake.
Mm,
Like if you can see the vision or you understand why they're doing what they're doing and there's some rationale or data or something behind it, then I can get behind that. I may not necessarily agree with it, but I can, if I have something that I feel like, okay, I see what, because that's when you're in a role and you have the leadership above you, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for them to have the company be successful so that you can, that you can work there, right? Obviously, because if the company's not doing something right, they go through layoffs. And I mean, no company will spin it that way, but that's inherently what's wrong, right? Like if you have to lay
mhm.
people off, you did something wrong. The company itself has made some mistakes. They will blame it on the economy, whatever. But inherently, something is wrong. So if you are still there through a layoff, then you might get a sense of like, okay, I made it, but then there's it that's can be a backhanded experience because you're like, oh, am I going to be part of the next wave or whatever? So it becomes very complicated in our feelings. But you have to have something to kind of hang your hat on in terms of like, this is the reason why we're doing it. And I've been in that situation where I'm trying to explain it to people who report to me who are like, "I don't why are we doing that? What is happening?" And they're looking to you to kind of explain it to them, so you've gotta have a good understanding. You can't just be like, "I don't know. It's crazy out there. I don't
This
know
is
what
what
they're
they
doing."
said to do, so
You
I'm
know?
doing it.
You become the sort of the mouthpiece of the explanation as well, so you're looking to your leadership to kind of give you guidance in that way. Yeah, I always just try to embrace it. Like, okay, this is what we're doing now. I may not necessarily fundamentally agree with it. I may not necessarily understand it, but I'm going to try to embrace it, work with it, provide feedback if I can. And if it's accepted, that's maybe a whole other thing. So,
Yeah, they made me think about I always feel like I bring them up every episode, Danielle, but our friends at Indeed and their structure and going through change when you said like that you become the mouthpiece, right, of this change and explaining the change. And when you go back to their business model, essentially, any changes that happen come down through leadership. And then ultimately, it's that sales rep that has to relay the message. Or if they're pushing for, let's say it's more dollars. from that organization. It's coming through this chain of command to say you need to ask for more dollars here.
You need to
And
grow
then
your business by 20%.
right, when you have the market
That's
captured, I mean,
crazy.
a commercial popped up yesterday as we were watching. I don't remember. I'm watching some, I always watch different series, but I'm watching this series and Richard's like, "How did you find this series?" But well, we're
I
refrain
saw an
from
Indeed
talking
commercial
their name.
on something I was watching the other day too, and I'm like, yeah,
Yeah. You have the market, the majority of the market captured when you think about this instance and them specifically. And this goes to kind of building. You build something great. You build something and you outpace your competitors, aka your career builders, your monsters, right? They outpace them, they outgrew them. They took a lot of the revenue from those places already. Then you think about the number of employers out there. And when I saw this commercial, I'm like, who doesn't know that you go to Indeed, right? If who doesn't know who Indeed is, right? You're
right,
advertising this, right? Oh, crap, I have an opening. I'm going to go to Indeed. You're probably already there if you have an opening, right? If you have a
right,
job
right,
open, let's just, or it doesn't work for you with this particular opening, so you might not be there, but it's a choice to
right.
use this. It's not a
You don't know at that
new,
point. Yeah,
it's not a new tool or a new, it's just not in this market. So
right, right,
I
right.
thought it was really interesting. So, anyways, when you look at that and you look at that model, and you look at how this pushes through, right? You have a chance because every time you push something through to your down, I'm going to call it down funnel for lack of a better term. You push it down funnel
Hmm.
to your person who is interacting with your client. So in this case, we're talking about your AE, your account executive that's
Hmm.
servicing the account, or your salesperson that's servicing, and they're getting feedback and they're telling their manager that feedback. They don't wanna spend because they don't have a budget. They don't wanna spend because they're not seeing ROI. They don't wanna spend because, right? So you have 10 different reasons to Sunday coming through,
Hmm.
and they're not ever really parroted back upline to
Right,
say, this is why, or this is so as an organization, when you're thinking about change, you're thinking about foundation building, you're thinking about how you're continuing to push a product and in which way you're pushing the product and how you're messaging out and how you're mouthpiecing that messaging to your AE, whoever that is, there has to be a loop back up that says, and somehow like this warning system, like what I see is kind of like I don't know, how do you create a warning system around when as you're building a foundation to say people are getting fatigued here? We keep asking for more money on
right,
our same product, and our usage is at 95%. How do you capture that other 5% is a different conversation, and I think
right,
that 1,300 I'm gonna go back to that 1,300 layoff. I think that 1,300 comes from, to your point, when you were talking a little bit earlier about they made some mistakes and if you're having to lay off people, right? Comes from being tone deaf
right,
in
right.
your product, in your what you're doing in your
Oh yeah,
organization. You're not
we
listening
could
back up.
probably name a dozen things that Indeed has done in the last,
Yeah.
going on your analogy about Indeed, that they've done in the last 5 years that have made it obvious that they were tone deaf. And a lot of that's from leadership. A lot of that's from, decisions made beyond the AE or, whatever. But yeah, there's investing in the wrong things, putting money in advertising that they don't need to do, or,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. When I think about like building a foundation, the first thing, and I've done a lot of recoveries and come into organizations and said, this is failing, this isn't working. How do we get this working? Right. The first thing that I look to understand is one, what's happening, what's being swept under the rug. What are we looking at from a performance perspective? What needs to change? What technology are we using? What people do we have in place? What process do we have in place? People, process,
Hmm.
technology. And then when you look at all those things and you determine what your path forward is and you're implementing all of this change and building the foundation within an organization, what is your warning system? What does that look like? What metric are you watching? How do you know? Like I always say, when I look at data, I can see a sneeze in it and I know when it's going to impact that back result. So
Hmm.
talking about even in our job market T, where we're talking and saying this isn't equating on the back end, you really can't see the sneezes in the data that's happening, or
Hmm.
the information isn't being, it hasn't caught itself yet. It hasn't
Right.
caught up to itself yet. So how do you really, as you look across that, pull that forward and know up front in the front funnel versus down funnel when something is starting to go awry, or maybe you didn't put in the right thing in place, or you need to pivot, or you need to make a change. So when I think about building a foundation, pulling that thread through, how do you really understand what are your early warning systems, signs, things of that nature, that one, what you're putting in place is or isn't working, and then two, as you put it in place. I did a three at my little fingers if people are watching. I meant to. So if you too, if you're putting that in place, right, how do you then change it to make sure that you're doing the right things to get the right results? So that's what I think about foundation building.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things, like, I was kinda thinking about historically things that we've seen in with big companies, like, let's just say, like, car manufacturing. That's very, very outside
Mhm.
our normal discussion, but, back in the day, Detroit was the big, manufacturing city, and Motor City, USA, and, all the major manufacturers were there and everything was around, Chevy, Ford, GMC, like all of the American brands, right? And then suddenly there starts to be more competition throughout the world and Japanese brands are coming in. We had like Volkswagen, we had Mercedes, we had BMW and all that, but some of those were more luxury or, low cost vehicles. So so there was this perception that, well, it's never going to change. We did this. This is what it is. So the car manufacturers started getting lazy. They weren't innovating. They weren't doing things to drive the costs down. They were very stagnant in the design or less fuel efficient. So then when you have things like fuel shortages, people are like, wait a second, I'm driving this vehicle that weighs a ton and the gas is really expensive. So a lot of it is like complacency, and
Mhm.
not really predicting the things that are going to happen in the future. Or so I think a lot of times companies are like, oh, we're doing good. We've got all these clients and whatever, and expecting that that is going to continue.
Yeah.
And in reality, you're not thinking about what the end user is going to deal with. So, like looking at Indeed, like I remember being in conversations with them where they're like, oh, well, basically the marching orders of the salesperson were to go and get you to increase your business by 20%. And we're like, our business isn't increasing by 20%. What makes you
Yeah.
think that you're going to get 20% more from us? How does that work? Because nobody wants to pay 20% more for anything, whether it's gas, whether it's the cost of going to the movies or dinner or whatever.
Mhm.
So it just is like a lack of imagination around what your customers are going to need in the future and how to gear your business towards that. And I don't, I'm not sitting in those meetings, so I'm not sure how those conversations go, but it really just seems like companies are, well, we just have to get more revenue. And
Mhm.
we need to, everybody just needs to pay us more money. We need to get more of this business. And then when you have things like companies like Career Builder and Monster that are dissolving, your competition is going away, so you don't really have a sense of urgency. So then when you have a glut in the market and things are going badly for companies, you're really going to see a huge loss of business because there's no competition. And so you've eliminated your competition, but you haven't done anything to make your product so innovative and so important or figure out how to support a client even through that type of business. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's interesting in that sense, and I don't really know what the solve for that would be, but at the same time, I feel like we've been here before, just in different ways. We remember when Yahoo Hot Jobs was purchased by Monster, and that hurt Monster in a major way,
Mhm.
especially then Indeed came up right behind that. So it's just, yeah, but I mean, my point here really is like, I know that companies like Coca-Cola stay really big because they do continually advertise. But at the same time, if you go into the grocery store and you look at all the different Coke products that they have now, it's not just Coke, Diet Coke, Coke Zero. I mean, there's like all these different flavors. It's crazy on the beverage aisle now, like I
Mhm.
like what world are we living in? We have all these crazy different drinks and energy drinks and this, that, and the other thing. And, so that's like trying to meet your customer where they are rather than just
Yeah.
like, well, these are the three options you have. So,
Mhm.
that's sort of what I mean, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You just always think about the business models and you have a chance, right? There's always a chance to listen.
Yeah.
There's always a chance to understand. Just kind of going back to these job boards as an example, the Indeeds, the Cribbler, some monsters, the whoever else is out there, and you're thinking about asking for increases from a business standpoint, they can see if a business, like, especially if you're in staffing and RPO, right? And even argue enterprise, corporate talent acquisition is what I'll argue.
Yeah.
You see almost every single job out there, or you're scraping the websites to be able to see how many jobs are out there. So you would organically know if an organization is going through a spike or a decline based on historic. So to me, it's just a blinders on. I don't really want to know. I just want more money and I'm going to
Yeah.
come after you. But we know what would be really helpful. I'm just going to throw this out there. You know what would be really helpful? If you come to that organization and say, hey, I see you had a downturn in jobs, right? Especially if you're like a staffing organization.
Mhm.
I've seen you'd have a downturn. You're not advertising as much based on what we're scraping off your board. Because they should be doing it, even if they have a direct feed and you're only sending certain jobs, or you should be looking and aggregating
And they
what
don't.
these chats, right? You should be looking at, right, what an organization has, regardless of how they're operating, what they're doing, those types of things. So to me, if you have that information at your fingertips or could glean that information at your fingertips, it's money motivated. It's the little monopoly
Right,
stat.
because I feel like a company like Indeed could come to a company like we've worked at and say, "We've noticed that, in 2024, you posted 20,000 jobs." Let's just say hypothetically, 20,000 jobs, and of those 20,000 jobs, 5,000 were skilled scientific jobs, 5,000 were IT centric, 5 were admin, and 5 were light industrial. Okay, so they have a breakdown. And then they came back and they said, looking at this year, you're on trend to only post 10,000 jobs. But we noticed that of that, the amount from these sectors has increased dramatically. Is that because you've acquired new customers? Is it because you're really going after that business? Is it because the other sectors have died down? Like, what is so you can really like partner with the customer to understand what's happening in their business to say, okay, well, if you're having trouble getting business from these clients, but we know that they are hiring people,
Hmm.
how can we partner with you to help you go get that business? Is it we're gonna provide you more data? Is it we're gonna give you a better deal on those jobs to get more traffic so that you can come to that customer and say, "Hey, we've got an incentive from Indeed or whatever to help increase visibility of these types of jobs," or whatever.
Hmm.
Like there should be more of a like, how can we think outside the box instead of the normal way we do this? And how can we partner to get those jobs, but also help you get that business so that we can then get the jobs because we can't get the jobs if you don't get the business, right? So, that's I can't imagine I can't remember ever being offered anything like that.
No.
And I'm not saying that's a great solution, but it is a way to like have a conversation with your client to say, we notice we're not getting these jobs anymore. Is there a reason why? And it's like, well, we're not getting those clients. I mean, I remember talking to programmatic vendors about it. Like, why aren't we getting those jobs? Like, well, we don't have that business. Oh, okay. And the conversation ends there. Well, why
Hmm.
don't they like help us get that business so that
Yeah.
they can in turn get those jobs? And then you have like a fuller conversation with your client, you know?
Yeah.
To like, let's open up everything and see what we can do here. So, you can get better, more business, you can hire more people, you can build your business, but at the same time, we can too. And then, you know, that's more of like I guess maybe like more of a grassroots type community based look at it. But I don't think companies do that kind of thing anymore.
It's more of an advisory look at it, I feel like,
Right.
not just grassroots. I feel like it becomes more advisory to be able to say, "We see this change in your business, help us understand it." So, like, from a job board perspective, to just kinda use that, and keep it there from that perspective. If you're looking at that foundation and that's the core service of what you deliver, or if you're in programmatic, right, that's a core service of what you deliver. And they say to you, oh, we didn't get enough candidates or whatever else. Okay, so how do we change that and how do we look at it, right? To one, bring that business back to ourselves if you're seeing a decrease in usage. But then two, how do you advise to be able to say, hey, understood you're not getting these roles anymore. Did you have, was it from a low success rate? Did you lose a client? Why did you lose a client? What does that look like? And then how do we help you build that back? Hey, by the way, I see these three companies are hiring those roles at a significant volume. So maybe that's a good sales lead for you. So in turn, you
Right.
can go get that business and we can help you service that business. Meanwhile, they can still sell into that business as a
Right.
job board, right? Or even a
Right.
program. You can still sell into that to go direct, but then you're still helping a staffing company earn, some additional business or say, let us help you supplement that because that's just going to come back to you.
Right.
But there's no thought
No. No.
to keep your business in its state at the foundational level to which you can deliver
Right.
different services, become an advisor, and have that stickiness within it. So when you just have that one point of view, how much can I just capture your revenue? Can I capture your revenue? Can I get more revenue from you? Can I capture your revenue? At some
Right.
point, there's no
Right.
more revenue to go get because
No.
you haven't also advised and helped that business shift as well when you had a
Right,
prime
and it
opportunity
builds distrust too, because it's like,
yourself.
the only reason we ever talking is just so you can tell me how much more expensive this is gonna get,
Yeah.
and why do I wanna spend more from you with you when I'm not getting what I need today? How
Hmm.
is it gonna be so much better? And we've seen that with Indeed and other companies too that have put all these, like, oh, these enhancements in that don't necessarily provide any sort of change or anything of value for what they're proclaiming. This new cost is going to be because we're doing that. Okay, well, prove it that that's going to work. And then can I turn it off if it doesn't work for me and I get the old price back? Oh no, you can't. It's just so this is just what it's going to be now. And I mean, I think we see that all the time in our society now where everything's like a subscription and this and that. And it's like we got away from cable because it was so expensive and you didn't have a lot of choice. So people are,
Hmm.
start switching up. But then you end up having like, is it even any cheaper if you're paying for
Not
all these
anymore.
subscriptions for everything? Like you got to get one for Peacock and then you got to get one for Hulu and
And then Gaia.
Max I mean, it's just crazy. And then you see companies like Indeed trying to start a subscription model for candidates, which LinkedIn already has that, which I think is completely BS. Like, what are we doing? Like
Yeah.
it's just, it feels very griftish, like everybody's out
Yes.
to make more money. And I get it, companies have to make money, but it gets to a point where it's like, you really just don't care. You really are just about, you know, the bottom line of what all this costs.
Yeah. How do you really come together as organizations strategically and provide value to each other? I think those are the organizations that are going to be able to evolve, shift, grow. I think on the foundational level, when you start to think that way, how do I grow with you? How do I evolve with you? How do I help based on the service I provide, right? If I'm a service provider, how do I help that shift in you to keep you sustained so I can stay sustained? And I think
Hmm.
it's been, for a long time in corporate, some vendors excluded or some partners excluded, whatever however you want to call them. But when you think about your partners, some partners excluded, if they're a partner, they're working in a different way organically to me. A vendor
Right.
works in a different way organically to me when I think
Hmm.
about it. But how are you coming together strategically and creating whatever it is that needs to be delivered and helping each other from a sustainability? I think if you're working in a silo and you're saying, how do I just capture more of your revenue? That's going to be short lived.
Everything is like quarter focused. Like this quarter, we've got to surpass this goal. We've got to get surpass this goal. We've got to, and so that's when like this push and pull between revenue and layoffs and the overhead and all this. And it's like we should, if you're building a business, especially if like you're starting from scratch as a sole proprietorship or something, that you're looking at the long term. Like, sure, yeah, you're trying to cover your bills and you're trying to make a little money, but you're not thinking about necessarily like, well, in Q3, I've really got to, you know, amp up my percentage of revenue over whatever. You're just trying to get by. You're just trying to make it so that you don't have to pack it up. But at the same time, like, that's sort of everything is tied to that. It's like, okay, you didn't spend as much here as we wanted you to, or we suggested that you should,
Yeah.
which is wild, which is always like, just really? What are you, you know, did you
Yeah.
listen to our earnings call? Like, any of that.
Yeah. I think when you think about that foundation level, right, is what I'll say when you're building, master builder, or looking across that thread that pulls through and creating that foundation. And then, two, from an organizational standpoint, what's your early warning systems across? And then, three, how do you make your partner, your client, your whatever, however you want to look at it, better and help them sustain their business? When you look at it from, we've done recruiting for so many years. The goal is to come in to help fulfill roles faster. It's not an expensive model when you look across in staffing. RPO is a lift and shift, so they don't have to hire in their internal talent acquisition. You're bringing SLAs, KPIs, delivering to that foundational level and ensuring that there's performance sitting alongside of that. So I think when
Mhm.
you think about how, in building up an organization, that becomes so critical is what is your mission? What's your why? And then how do you build and create around that? All right. Should we stop there?
Yep, I think that's a good place to stop.
Okay. Like, share, follow, comment. Danielle, you want to close us out?
Yeah. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Worksties. We're available on every major streaming and listening platform out there. Please like, subscribe, follow, comment, all of the above.
All right. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.